Think about the last time someone accused you of something you did not do, or questioned your motives, or spread a rumor about you. What did you do? You explained yourself. You corrected the record. You sent the message, made the call, posted the response, laid out the facts, point by point, making absolutely certain that everyone understood your side. And after all of that effort, after pouring your energy into every word of your defense, did they believe you? Did it change anything? Or did it feel like the more you talked, the worse it got? That instinct, the one that drives you to open your mouth the moment you feel attacked, is the most expensive mistake you will ever make. And Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago, with a clarity so sharp it cuts through every century between his time and yours. This is not a history lesson. This is a diagnosis of how you are bleeding power right now, today, in your relationships, your career, and your reputation. Pay close attention, because what you are about to hear is completely counterintuitive, and that is exactly why almost no one applies it. In 1513, a man named Niccolo Machiavelli sat in forced exile on a small farm outside Florence, Italy. He had served the Florentine Republic for 14 years as a senior diplomat, negotiating with kings, popes, military commanders, and hired warlords. He had watched governments collapse from the inside. He had seen powerful men reduced to nothing overnight. And then, when the Medici family returned to power and dismantled the republic he served, Machiavelli was arrested. He was imprisoned. He was tortured on the strappado, a device that dislocated shoulders by suspension, accused of conspiracy against the new rulers. He confessed to nothing. He defended himself with nothing. He endured it in silence. They eventually released him for lack of evidence. And in the silence of his exile, stripped of every title and every platform, he wrote the most influential manual on power in Western history. The Prince, the book that governments have banned, burned, and secretly read for 500 years. The book that world leaders study and publicly deny. The man who wrote it had lost everything. And in losing everything, he understood something that comfortable people never learned. The moment you start explaining yourself, you have already started losing. Here is the central insight of the Prince. And this is the one that will rearrange how you see every conflict you have ever been in. Machiavelli wrote that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands. What he meant was devastatingly simple. The world does not evaluate you based on your intentions. The world evaluates you based on what you project, not what you mean, what they see, not your truth, their perception. This is not a cynical observation. This is the single most important fact about human social psychology, confirmed by 5 centuries of history and every social psychology study published in the last 50 years. People form judgments in seconds, and those judgments are almost never revised by argument. They are revised by behavior, specifically by the behavior that follows a conflict. And here is what Machiavelli noticed in pattern after pattern across every court, every city-state, every military campaign he analyzed. The leader who defended himself publicly almost always lost the perception war, even when he won the factual argument. The facts did not matter. The posture did. The man who stood calm, immovable, and silent while accusations swirled around him commanded more authority than the man who methodically proved every accusation false. This is the paradox at the heart of strategic power. And it has nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with psychology. When you feel attacked and you rush to defend yourself, something very specific happens in the minds of the people watching. Before you say a single word, your urgency signals that the attack landed. The speed of your response communicates anxiety, and anxiety, to the observing mind, reads as guilt. Not because logic demands it, because instinct interprets it that way. Think about it from the outside. When someone is completely secure in their position, what do they do when confronted with a false accusation? They do not panic. They do not over-explain. They do not send 3 messages when one would have been enough. They respond with calm precision. Or they do not respond at all. And that composure, that apparent indifference, signals something to every person watching. This person knows something you do not know. This person is operating from a position of strength so solid that your attack does not even reach them. Machiavelli called this quality virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, not goodness or kindness. Virtue in the Machiavellian sense is the capacity to act with precision, timing, and psychological firmness in the face of opposition. It is the ability to sit still when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to move. It is the discipline to choose your response rather than react from your wound. Virtue is what separates a man who holds power from a man who performs power. And the constant, frantic need to explain yourself is the clearest possible signal that virtue is absent. Let us be specific about what happens structurally when you over-defend yourself. Because this is not just abstract philosophy. This is a precise mechanism that you can observe in your own life. When you defend yourself, you hand your adversary something priceless, the agenda. The moment you respond to an accusation, you have implicitly accepted that the accusation is worth responding to. You have elevated it. You have given it a platform it did not have before. You have invited your audience to examine it more closely. Where before there was a rumor, now there is a debate. And a debate always suggests that both sides have a point. Machiavelli was meticulous about this in The Prince. He observed that rulers who engaged in public disputes over their honor consistently weakened their position, not because they lost the argument, but because the argument itself communicated weakness. A truly sovereign authority does not debate its own legitimacy. It simply exists. The lion does not hold a press conference to explain that it is still the lion. The moment it needs to, the savannah has already moved on. Renaissance Italy was a laboratory for this principle at its most extreme. The stakes in Machiavelli's world were not damaged reputations or lost clients. The stakes were exile, imprisonment, and execution. Rulers were not overthrown because of their actual failures. They were overthrown because the perception of weakness spread through their courts like a virus, infecting allies and emboldening enemies. Once people began to believe a leader could be rattled, could be destabilized by accusation, drawn into argument, forced to justify himself, the collapse was only a matter of time. Machiavelli documented case after case of leaders who fell not from their mistakes, but from their responses to accusations about their mistakes. They stepped into the enemy's frame. They accepted the terms of engagement chosen by someone who wished them harm. And in doing so, they made themselves small enough to be removed. The lesson was not that rulers should be impervious to criticism. The lesson was that rulers should develop the psychological architecture to distinguish between attacks that threaten their actual power and attacks that only threaten their pride. Most attacks only threaten pride. And defending pride is the most expensive luxury a person in any position of influence can afford. Now here is where Machiavelli's framework becomes almost uncomfortably relevant to your daily life. You live in a world that Machiavelli could not have imagined in its specifics, but that he would have understood immediately in its structure. The internet is the largest, fastest, most amplified version of the Renaissance Florentine public square that has ever existed. Rumors that once took weeks to spread through a city now spread through millions of feeds in minutes. And the temptation, the overwhelming, nearly irresistible temptation, is to respond immediately, to correct the record, to post the explanation, to record the clarifying video, to reply to the comment, to put out the statement. Every platform is engineered to make you feel that silence is dangerous. That if you do not respond, you are consenting to the narrative, that the window is closing and you must act now or lose permanently. This is a trap, and it is a trap because the people who built these platforms understand your psychology better than you understand it yourself. The anxiety that drives you to respond is the very same anxiety that makes you look reactive, unstable, and small to everyone watching. Machiavelli, if he were alive today, studying the algorithm with the same precision he studied the courts of Florence, would see immediately what is happening. He would see that the architecture of social media is designed to reward impulsive response and punish strategic silence. He would also see that the individuals who break that pattern, who respond rarely, deliberately, and with surgical precision, are the ones who accumulate the most durable influence, not the loudest voices, the most composed ones. Consider what actually happens when someone with genuine authority is attacked publicly in the modern context. They do not respond in the comment section. They do not post a 7-part story rebuttal. They do not record themselves at 2 in the morning explaining why the accusations are false. They say nothing, or they say one thing once when the timing is theirs to choose, and the silence reads as power, because it is power. The choice not to engage is always read as confidence by observers, unless the silence is combined with visible panic elsewhere. Which is why Machiavelli's virtue is not simply the tactical decision to stay quiet. It is the internal condition that makes staying quiet feel natural rather than agonizing. It is the psychological state in which you genuinely understand that most of what people say about you reflects nothing about your actual position, only their need to disrupt it. And once you understand that, deeply and structurally, the silence becomes effortless. You are not suppressing the urge to respond. You are recognizing that there is nothing worth the energy of a response. There is a distinction that Machiavelli draws in The Prince, and this distinction is the most practically useful idea in the entire book. He distinguishes between criticisms that threaten real power and criticisms that threaten only vanity. This is the calibration that separates strategic silence from negligence. You do not ignore everything. That is passivity, not strategy. You do not respond to everything. That is reactivity, not engagement. You develop the judgment, slowly, deliberately through practice, to know the difference between an attack that requires a response and an attack that feeds on attention. A threat to your real power, your livelihood, your legal standing, your essential relationships, requires a response, calibrated, precise, and delivered on your terms and timeline. A threat to your ego, your image, your need to be understood, your desire for approval. That threat is best handled with absolute silence. Because the moment you defend your ego, you have revealed that your ego is available for attack. And everything that is visible can be targeted. Everything that is protected by indifference becomes untouchable. This is what Machiavelli means when he describes the prince who cultivates mystery. Not theatrical mystery, not deliberate evasion. The natural mystery that comes from a person who does not feel compelled to make their interior life legible to everyone around them. When you explain your every decision, your every motive, your every reaction, you become completely readable. And a completely readable person is a completely predictable person. And a completely predictable person has no strategic advantage in any conflict, social, professional, or personal. The person who says less than necessary, who allows others to fill the silence with their own interpretations, maintains a psychological leverage that no argument can create. People fill silence with their own projections, and projections are almost always more favorable than the reality you would have revealed through over-explanation. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the most sophisticated communication tool available to a person who understands power. Now let us be direct about what this means in practice, because philosophy without application is just entertainment. The next time someone accuses you of something, in a meeting, in a relationship, in a comment section, in a conversation, Before you open your mouth, before you type a single word, ask yourself one question. Is this attack threatening my actual life, or is it threatening my comfort? If the answer is your comfort, your image, your need to be right, your desire to correct the record, close your mouth. Let it pass. Watch what happens. The accusation will either collapse on its own weight, which most accusations do, or it will require a response later, on your terms, when the emotional temperature has dropped, and your answer will be surgical rather than defensive. And if you choose to respond, choose once, choose deliberately, and then stop. One clear statement, delivered without anxiety, without over-explanation, without the need to convince. State your position. Stop. Let your conduct speak for everything else. There is a reason that the most respected people in any field, the executives who have built something real, the artists who have produced lasting work, the thinkers whose ideas survive their critics, share a common characteristic. They do not chase approval. They do not manage their image through constant explanation. They produce, they act, and they let the accumulation of their work stand as the only argument that matters. This is virtue at its most complete, not the absence of criticism. No one who does anything significant is exempt from criticism, but the presence of a sufficiently developed internal architecture that criticism, however loud, cannot reach the foundation. Machiavelli, writing from exile, stripped of every external marker of status, understood this viscerally because he had been forced to find it in himself. The torture on the strappado did not break him because he had already made the internal decision that his worth was not determined by the judgments of men who had imprisoned him. He confessed nothing. He explained nothing. He endured it in silence. And then he wrote the book that they are still reading 500 years later. The question you need to sit with, the one that will make this video worth more than the time you spent watching it, is this. What are you currently defending that does not actually need your defense? What narrative are you feeding with your anxiety? What accusation are you amplifying by responding to it? What perception are you creating about your instability every time you rush to explain yourself to someone who had already decided what they think of you? Because Machiavelli's lesson, stripped to its core, is not about silence for the sake of appearing powerful. It is about the recognition that true power does not need performance. It does not need explanation. It does not need the approval of the people who are trying to undermine it. It needs only consistency, composure, and the disciplined refusal to let anyone else choose the terms of your engagement. That refusal, quiet, total, and absolute, is the most powerful statement you will ever make. If this made you see something in yourself that you had not noticed before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video and subscribe. There is much more ahead.